Microsoft promised Windows 11 would redefine computing, yet by 2025, nearly half of all users are refusing to upgrade, even as support for Windows 10 disappears. Privacy fears, relentless account requirements, and unyielding hardware demands have ignited a revolt threatening the trust that made Microsoft an industry giant. How did a company built on empowering users create a crisis that could upend its legacy? The answer begins in the boardroom, not the code. Under Satya Nadella's leadership, Microsoft's financial backbone has shifted from consumer Windows licensing to cloud and subscription services. In the early 2010s, Windows accounted for nearly a third of Microsoft's total revenue, but by fiscal year 2025, that figure had dropped below 10%. The company's annual reports now show Azure and Microsoft 365 generating more than 4 times the revenue of Windows OEM licenses. In the last fiscal year, the Intelligent Cloud division, driven by Azure, reported $124 billion in revenue, while productivity and business processes, led by Microsoft 365, brought in over $82 billion. Together, these segments made up nearly 3/4 of Microsoft's total revenue, eclipsing the entire Windows business. Operating income tells a similar story. Cloud and subscription services delivered profit margins as high as 60 to 70% compared to the low 20% for Windows OEM. By 2025, less than $1 in 6 of Microsoft's operating profit came from the Windows segment. Quarterly earnings calls reinforced this shift. Nadella routinely highlighted Azure's double-digit growth and the rapid expansion of AI-driven services like Copilot. Chief Financial Officer Amy Hood described consumer Windows as a mature, low-growth area, with future growth anchored firmly in recurring enterprise contracts and cloud subscriptions. This financial realignment explains many of Windows 11's most controversial design choices. Features like mandatory Microsoft account logins, persistent OneDrive prompts, and deep Copilot integration are not just technical decisions, they are business strategies. Each nudge toward a cloud service or recurring payment reflects a revenue model where the operating system acts as a launchpad for higher margin products. The numbers are clear. Microsoft's priorities now lie in keeping users within its subscription ecosystem, not in selling a one-time Windows license. For everyday users, these nudges feel like pressure tactics, but for Microsoft, they are the logical outcome of a decade-long transformation in how the company makes money. Mandatory Microsoft account logins now stand between users and their desktops. For the first time, a local-only account is no longer an option during setup on most new PCs. The operating system checks for internet connectivity, blocks local account creation, and directs users into the company's cloud ecosystem by default. Every step nudges people toward OneDrive, Microsoft 365, and Copilot, sometimes with pop-ups, sometimes with subtle reminders that files are safer or features are more powerful if users just sign in. Even basic settings like wallpaper sync or clipboard history now require a Microsoft account, blurring the line between the device and the cloud. For home users, these changes feel less like progress and more like a loss of control. What began as a personal tool for work, creativity, or gaming now acts as a channel for data collection and subscription offers. The desktop, once a private space, becomes a billboard for cloud services. Some users report repeated prompts to upgrade storage, try premium apps, or enable AI features, even after declining multiple times. Others describe how the system quietly uploads files or settings in the background with limited explanation or clear consent. The shift is not just technical, it is psychological. Autonomy is eroded when choices are replaced by requirements and when familiar workflows are interrupted by account checks or service pitches. For families sharing a device, or for anyone who prefers to keep their files local, the sense of ownership fades. The operating system's priorities are unmistakable. keep users logged in, keep data flowing, and keep the cloud at the center of every interaction. This is the new reality for Windows users. The operating system no longer serves as a neutral platform, but as a funnel, guiding every click and keystroke toward Microsoft's cloud. As the distance between user needs and corporate incentives grows, so does the risk that trust will break down completely. A security researcher sits at a cluttered desk, laptop open, running a simple script. Within seconds, a folder fills with hundreds of images, each one a screenshot captured by Windows Recall every 5 seconds. The files sit in a local directory, stored in an unencrypted SQLite database. No password, no encryption, no barrier beyond basic file access. The researcher scrolls through the images, webmail logins, private chats, bank statements, even one-time passcodes, all indexed, all searchable, all exposed to any malware or attacker able to reach the user profile folder. In May 2024, Microsoft introduced Recall as a flagship AI feature for Copilot Plus PCs. The company promised a photographic memory for your computer, automatically recording everything you do so you could search your digital life by keyword or date. But within days of the first public preview, security analysts demonstrated just how vulnerable this archive could be. They published walkthroughs showing how anyone with access to the device, malware, a rogue employee, or even a curious family member could extract the entire Recall database with a few lines of code. Sensitive content appeared in plain view with no audit trail and no user notification. The backlash was immediate. Researchers warned that the unprotected database turned every PC into a potential goldmine for attackers. Headlines called "Recall a Hacker's Dream." Within 2 weeks, Microsoft paused the rollout and promised to add encryption and biometric access controls. By September 2024, updates required Windows Hello authentication and encrypted the Recall database by default. Still, the damage was done. The ease of the initial exploit left a lasting impression. Microsoft had built a surveillance tool into the heart of Windows 11 and then left the vault door wide open. For many users, Recall became the symbol of a deeper problem, a company willing to gamble with privacy for the sake of AI-driven features. Trust, once lost, proved hard to recover. The story of Recall was no isolated misstep. It was the first clear fracture in the relationship between Microsoft and its users. Windows 11's data collection does not stop at headline features like Recall. Deep within the system, telemetry runs constantly, gathering information about device configuration, installed software, performance statistics, and how users interact with their apps. For most home users, this data flow is not a choice. Required diagnostic data is sent automatically, with no option to fully disable it in Windows 11 Home or Pro editions. The only way to reduce what is shared is to toggle off optional diagnostics, leaving the core data stream untouched. Enterprise customers, by contrast, can negotiate a different reality. Large organizations running Windows 11 Enterprise or Education gain access to group policies that sharply limit or even block telemetry at the source. Some can route diagnostic data to internal servers, audit every transmission, or use tools to monitor exactly what leaves their network. For everyday consumers, these controls are absent. The Diagnostic Data Viewer, Microsoft's transparency tool, demands additional downloads and gigabytes of storage just to glimpse what is being sent. Even then, most users find the information dense, technical, and difficult to interpret. Privacy advocates have called out this imbalance. One described it as a two-tier system, where those with money and legal leverage can demand privacy, while individuals are left with little more than a checkbox for optional data. Regulators in Europe and elsewhere have questioned whether default collection settings truly respect consent, especially when opting out is buried under layers of settings or simply unavailable. Meanwhile, Microsoft's documentation describes telemetry as essential for updates, security, and product improvement without addressing why full opt-out is reserved for enterprise clients. The result is a silent, persistent flow of user data from hundreds of millions of personal computers to Microsoft's servers. For those who value privacy or simply want control over their own devices, the asymmetry is hard to ignore. The operating system that once belonged to its users now seems to work for someone else. As this pattern becomes clearer, the friction between Microsoft and its consumer base only grows. A wave of upgrade failures swept through offices and small businesses as Windows 11's hardware checks rejected machine after machine. The culprit was a requirement for TPM 2.0, a security chip designed to protect encryption keys and prevent firmware attacks. Microsoft described it as a necessary step for modern security. For IT managers, it became a logistical nightmare. Nearly half the desktops in mid-sized organizations failed the Windows 11 compatibility test, not because they were slow or unreliable, but because they lacked a chip most users had never heard of. Procurement teams faced invoices running into hundreds of thousands of dollars just to keep pace with the new standard. One IT manager, responsible for a fleet of 500 computers, calculated that replacing every non-compliant personal computer would cost upwards of $750,000. It was an impossible sum for a department already stretched thin. Small business owners felt the impact even more acutely. Retailers and cafe operators discovered that perfectly good computers, some less than 5 years old, were suddenly labeled obsolete. A single replacement could cost $600 or more, not including the lost revenue from downtime. For many, the only alternative was to stick with Windows 10. Despite the looming end of support, the frustration was palpable. Machines that ran smoothly yesterday were now obsolete, not because of performance, but because of a missing chip. Hardware gating did not just slow adoption, it bred resentment. Across the business world, stories circulated of upgrade projects stalled, budgets blown, and IT teams forced to choose between security and solvency. Millions of devices remained locked out of Windows 11, fueling a quiet revolt that would echo in the statistics for years to come. OneDrive prompts now appear throughout daily work, surfacing at startup, after saving files, or even when closing documents. Declining these invitations rarely settles the matter. Instead, the same reminders return, sometimes within minutes, urging users to sync their desktops or buy more storage. For those who prefer to keep files on their own devices, the constant nudging feels less like a helpful suggestion and more like a campaign. Reports of files uploading automatically or settings reverting after updates have left many feeling that their own computers are no longer fully under their control. The pressure does not stop with storage. Copilot, Microsoft's AI assistant, is woven into search, settings, and even the taskbar. The company's multi-billion-dollar partnership with OpenAI has made Copilot a centerpiece of Windows 11's identity. But even as Copilot expands, Microsoft's own support documentation cautions users not to trust its answers for critical tasks. Warnings about hallucinated facts and unreliable recommendations are tucked into help pages, reminding users that the AI may invent information, misunderstand requests, or misinterpret context. Many users report that Copilot's presence feels more like an experiment than a finished tool. Some find it draining system resources, slowing down everyday tasks, or surfacing unhelpful suggestions. The promise of smarter computing is often overshadowed by the reality of repeated interruptions and questionable accuracy. For those just looking to work or browse in peace, the daily friction from OneDrive and Copilot has become a source of steady irritation, eroding patience with every prompt and pop-up. A long-time Windows user sits at their desk, watching the familiar blue login screen flicker for the last time. Years of coding, gaming, and tinkering have shaped their workflow around Windows, but the daily grind of prompts, forced updates, and cloud nudges has worn them down. After weeks of research and late-night forum threads, they download Ubuntu. The installation wipes away years of shortcuts and custom scripts, but the user feels relief, not regret. The decision was not made lightly. Migrating to Linux meant relearning basic tasks, troubleshooting printer drivers, and giving up certain games and apps, but the trade-offs felt worth it. No more Microsoft account roadblocks, no more OneDrive pop-ups, no more telemetry siphoning data in the background. System resources run lighter, and the desktop feels like it belongs to the user again. One post reads, "It took me a weekend to adjust, but I finally feel in control of my computer." This story echoes across online communities. Power users and developers, once loyal to Windows, are choosing open source alternatives out of frustration, not curiosity. They accept the inconvenience and technical hurdles because they value autonomy more than convenience. The sense of ownership, lost in Windows 11's maze of cloud hooks and AI overlays, is reclaimed line by line, command by command. For these users, the migration is not just about software, it is about trust, control, and the freedom to decide what happens on their own machines. Microsoft has maintained a consistent public stance on Windows 11's direction, emphasizing its security and cloud-first design as necessary for the future of computing. The company points to its track record on defending user data and the importance of modern security standards. In official statements and earnings calls, executives highlight features like TPM 2.0 and integrated cloud services as critical safeguards against evolving cyber threats. They argue that these requirements are not arbitrary barriers, but essential measures to protect users and organizations from ransomware, firmware attacks, and data breaches. Financially, Microsoft's position remains strong. The company's quarterly reports show cloud services and enterprise subscriptions as the main engines of growth. Azure revenue climbed to $124 billion in fiscal year 2025, and Microsoft 365 subscriptions surpassed 80 million paid seats. These segments now account for nearly 3/4 of total revenue, dwarfing the contribution from Windows consumer licenses. Profit margins from cloud and productivity services consistently outpace those from traditional Windows sales, with the Intelligent Cloud division reporting margins above 60%. Microsoft's leadership frames the adoption of AI features like Copilot and the deeper integration of OneDrive as innovations that keep the platform competitive. They point to positive outcomes in enterprise deployments, where organizations report improved compliance, reduced security incidents, and streamlined workflows. The company acknowledges user concerns over privacy and control, but insists that ongoing updates, transparency tools, and opt-in options for new features reflect a commitment to trust. For Microsoft, the shift in strategy is not a retreat from consumers, but a calculated move to secure long-term relevance and stability in a rapidly changing technology landscape. Today, Microsoft's profits surge, but nearly half of Windows users refuse to follow its vision. As trust fractures, the world's most used operating system sits at a crossroads between innovation and intrusion. The next move will define not just Microsoft's future, but the boundaries of digital autonomy for billions. The question is no longer what users will accept, but what they will abandon. Share your thoughts below.